A hungry widow stood trembling at the castle gates. With tears in her eyes, she said to the knight, "Please, take my children. Let them live a better life than I can give." The knight looked at her, then at the children, and did the unthinkable. He said, "I'll take you too. Before we begin, let us know in the comments what city are you watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story." The rain hammered against the wooden shutters of the small cottage at the edge of the village. Inside, Margaret pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked at the last piece of bread on the table. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she pushed the bread toward her 3 children instead. "Mama, you need to eat too," whispered Emma, her eldest at only 8 years old. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You 3 share it." Margaret forced a smile, though her hands shook from weakness. It had been 6 months since the plague took her husband. 6 months of trying to find work, of begging for scraps, of watching her children grow thinner. The villagers had stopped helping weeks ago. They had their own troubles, they said. A widow with 3 young mouths to feed was too much burden for anyone. Thunder crashed overhead, and little Thomas began to cry. At 4 years old, he didn't understand why his belly hurt so much. Margaret gathered him into her arms, feeling how light he'd become. "Shh, my love, tomorrow will be better." But she knew it wouldn't be. The landlord was coming in the morning. Without rent money, they'd be thrown into the streets. In this storm, in the cold, her children wouldn't survive a single night. A heavy knock at the door made them all jump. Margaret's heart sank. Had the landlord come early? She stood on trembling legs and opened the door. A knight stood in the doorway, rain streaming off his dark armor. His horse waited behind him, its breath forming clouds in the cold air. The knight's face was hard to see beneath his helmet, but Margaret could make out sharp features and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Please, sir," Margaret began, "we have nothing to steal. I'm not here to take anything." His voice was deep, commanding. "I seek shelter from the storm. We have no food to offer, no proper bed, nothing." The knight stepped inside anyway, water pooling at his feet. He looked around the bare cottage, at the 3 frightened children huddled together, at Margaret's hollow cheeks. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked. Margaret's pride wanted to lie, but exhaustion won. 3 days ago. The children had some bread yesterday. And you?" She stayed silent. The knight reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out several gold coins. More money than Margaret had ever seen at once. "There's an inn at the crossroads. They'll have rooms and food." "I cannot accept this." Margaret's voice cracked. "We have no way to repay you." "I didn't ask for repayment." "Then what do you want?" Nothing came free. Margaret had learned that lesson well these past months. The knight removed his helmet, revealing a face younger than she'd expected. Dark hair, severe features, but eyes that held unexpected warmth. "I want nothing. But I offer you a choice." "What choice?" "Come with me to my castle. There's work there. Honest work. Your children will be educated, fed, given proper clothing. You'll serve as head of my household staff." Margaret stared at him. "Why would you offer this to strangers?" "Because I know what it's like to be desperate, to be alone, to have everyone turn their backs when you need them most." 6-year-old James tugged at Margaret's skirt. "Mama, can we go with the nice knight?" Margaret looked at her children's hopeful faces, then back at the knight. "And if I refuse? Then take the gold and find your own way. But my offer stands." Margaret's hands trembled as she held the gold coins. They were real, heavy and cold in her palm. Her children stared at the knight with wide eyes, as if he might disappear like a dream. "You don't even know us," Margaret said. "I could be a thief, a liar. Are you?" "No. But then that's all I need to know." The knight moved to the window, looking out at the storm. "I leave at dawn. The choice is yours." "Where is your castle?" Emma asked, brave enough to speak. 3 days' ride north, in the mountain passes. It's called Ironhold." Margaret's breath caught. Everyone knew of Ironhold, the cursed castle, they called it, where the bitter knight commander lived alone, refusing all visitors. Stories said he'd been scarred in battle, that he'd lost his entire family to betrayal, that he trusted no one. "You're Sir Roderick," she whispered. He turned back to her, his jaw tight. "Does that change your answer? They say you're a monster, cursed, mad." His laugh was bitter. "Yes, I've heard them all. The truth is simpler. I'm just a man who prefers solitude to the company of liars and gossips." "Then why offer us shelter?" For a moment, his harsh expression softened. "Because children shouldn't suffer for the cruelty of this world. And because—" He paused. "Because I know what it's like to watch everything you love slip away while others just watch." Thomas had fallen asleep in Margaret's arms, his small fingers clutching her dress. James and Emma pressed against her sides, waiting for her decision. "If we come," Margaret said carefully, "what exactly would my duties be?" "Managing the castle staff, overseeing the kitchens, ensuring the household runs smoothly." "You have staff?" "The stories say you live alone. Stories are rarely accurate. I have a small staff, loyal people who've served my family for generations. But I need someone to lead them, someone who understands what it means to make do with little, someone who won't waste resources or tolerate laziness. And my children will be treated as part of the household. My old tutor still lives at Ironhold. He's desperate for pupils. Your eldest seems sharp. She reminds me of—" He stopped, pain flickering across his face. "Of who?" "It doesn't matter." His voice hardened again. "What's your answer?" Margaret looked around the empty cottage. At the leak in the corner where rain was getting in, at the empty cupboards, at the cold fireplace they couldn't afford to light. Then she looked at her children. Emma trying to be brave, James curious despite his fear, little Thomas too young to understand how close they were to disaster. "The villagers will talk," she said. "They'll say terrible things about a widow going to live with a man. Let them talk. Their words won't feed your children. You could be lying. This could be a trick. I could be. It might be." He put his helmet back on. "But what other choice do you have? Stay here and starve with your pride intact? Or take a chance on something better?" A loud crack of thunder shook the cottage. Water began dripping faster through the roof, splashing onto the floor near the table. "Mama," Emma whispered, "please, I don't want to be hungry anymore." The words broke Margaret's heart. Her pride meant nothing against her children's needs. She'd failed to provide for them alone. Maybe it was time to accept help, even from a notorious knight. "We'll come," Margaret said, the words barely above a whisper. Sir Roderick nodded once. "Pack what you need. We leave at first light." "We have nothing to pack," Margaret admitted, shame burning her cheeks. "Then rest. You'll need strength for the journey." He moved toward the door. "I'll return at dawn with a wagon and supplies." "Where will you sleep?" "I don't sleep much." He paused at the doorway. "Bar the door behind me. Trust no one else who comes knocking tonight." After he left, Margaret stood frozen for a moment. What had she just agreed to? The children, however, were already chattering excitedly. "Will we really have food every day?" James asked, bouncing on his toes. "The night seemed nice," Emma said, though worry creased her young face. "But Mama, why do people say he's cursed?" Margaret gathered them close. "Sometimes when people suffer great loss, they choose to be alone. It doesn't make them evil, just sad." She barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. What if the night didn't return? What if this was all some cruel joke? But as the first gray light of dawn crept through the shutters, she heard wagon wheels outside. Sir Roderick stood beside a covered wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He'd brought thick woolen cloaks for all of them, and Margaret nearly cried when she saw the basket of food in the wagon bed. "Eat as we travel," he said, helping the children up. His hands were gentle as he lifted Thomas, who was still half asleep. Margaret noticed how he avoided touching her directly, only offering his hand when absolutely necessary to help her into the wagon. He was maintaining proper distance, protecting her reputation even now. The journey north was like nothing Margaret had ever experienced. The children huddled under warm blankets, eating fresh bread and cheese while watching the landscape change. Villages gave way to forests, then to rocky hills. Sir Roderick rode alongside them, silent unless asked a direct question. On the second night, they stopped at an inn. The innkeeper's eyes widened when he saw Sir Roderick. "My lord, we weren't expecting." "4 rooms," Roderick said curtly, placing coins on the counter. "And hot meals sent up." 4 rooms? The innkeeper glanced at Margaret and the children with obvious curiosity. "Is there a problem?" "No, my lord. Right away." Margaret heard the innkeeper's wife whispering as they climbed the stairs. "That's the cursed night. What's he doing with a woman and children?" That night, Emma crawled into Margaret's bed. "Mama, why are people afraid of him?" "I don't know the whole story, sweetheart. He doesn't seem scary. Just sad." From the mouths of children, Margaret thought. Emma was right. Beneath his harsh exterior, Sir Roderick carried a deep sadness. The 3rd day, the road grew steeper. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks lost in clouds. Then, as they rounded a bend, Ironhold appeared. The castle wasn't what Margaret expected. Stories described it as a dark, crumbling fortress. But while it was certainly imposing, built of black stone against the mountainside, it was well maintained. Gardens stretched along the terraced walls. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, suggesting warmth and life inside. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed. Sir Roderick's head turned sharply toward her, surprise flickering across his features. "Most find it forbidding." "It looks strong," Emma said. "Safe." Something in the knight's expression shifted. For just a moment, Margaret saw past his armor to the man beneath. The wagon rolled through the massive iron gates, and Margaret felt her children press closer to her. The courtyard was neat and orderly, with several servants stopping their work to stare. An elderly man hurried forward, his face creased with concern. "My lord, we weren't expecting." "This is Margaret," Sir Roderick announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "She'll be taking charge of the household. These are her children. They're to be treated with full respect." The old man's eyes widened. "Of course, my lord. Margaret, this is William, my steward. He'll show you to your quarters." Before Margaret could respond, Sir Roderick dismounted and strode away, disappearing into the castle without another word. William offered a kind smile. "Don't take it personally, my lady. His lordship isn't much for conversation. Come, let me show you to your rooms." The servants' quarters William led them to were nicer than any place Margaret had ever lived. 3 bedrooms, a sitting area, and windows overlooking the gardens. The children ran from room to room in delight. "This is ours?" James asked in wonder. "Indeed, young master," William said. His lordship was quite specific. "You're to have everything you need." But these aren't servants' quarters," Margaret protested. "These rooms are far too grand." William's expression grew thoughtful. His lordship said you were to have these particular rooms. They've been closed for 5 years, ever since. He stopped himself. "Since what? It's not my story to tell. But know this, my lady. His lordship doesn't do anything without reason." That evening, Margaret was summoned to the great hall. Sir Roderick sat alone at a massive table, the space echoing with emptiness. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair near him. Margaret sat carefully, aware of the impropriety. "My lord, I should eat with the staff." "No, you're not a common servant. You're my household manager. You'll dine at the main table. People will talk. They already do." He pushed a ledger toward her. "These are the household accounts. Can you read?" "Yes, my lord. My father was a merchant before he died." "Good. Then you'll understand what needs to be done. We have 15 staff members. The accounts are a mess. Food is being wasted. Supplies disappear. I suspect theft, but have no proof." Margaret studied the ledger, her merchant's daughter training immediately spotting the discrepancies. "You're losing 30% of your supplies. These numbers don't match. Someone's been altering the records. Can you fix it?" "Yes, but I'll need full authority over the staff. Some won't like taking orders from a newcomer." "You have it. Anyone who refuses to follow your instructions will answer to me. Why trust me with this? You don't know me." Sir Roderick stood, walking to the window. "My wife used to manage the household. After she died, everything fell apart. William tries, but he's too soft. The staff takes advantage." Margaret's heart clenched. So he had been married. "How did she die?" if I may ask. You may not. His voice turned cold again. Focus on the household. That's all I require. The next morning, Margaret gathered the staff. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with barely hidden resentment. The cook, a large woman named Bertha, crossed her arms defiantly. We've managed fine without some stranger telling us our business, Bertha declared. Have you? Margaret kept her voice steady. Then explain why the ledgers show we purchased 50 pounds of flour last week, but only 30 pounds made it to the kitchens. Bertha's face reddened. Are you calling me a thief? I'm saying the numbers don't lie. Either someone's stealing or there's terrible waste. Either way, it stops now. You can't just walk in here and, I can and I will. Margaret stood straighter. His lordship has given me complete authority. You can accept that, or you can find employment elsewhere. The room fell silent. Margaret's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. Finally, Bertha looked away. What do you want us to do? First, we inventory everything. Every sack of grain, every preserved ham, every jar of preserves. Then, we establish new procedures. All supplies will be logged when they arrive and when they're used. No exceptions. An older maid raised her hand timidly. My lady, some of us can't write. Margaret's expression softened. Then you'll learn. 1 hour each evening, I'll teach anyone who wants to learn their letters and numbers. The staff exchanged surprised looks. The previous household manager had never offered such a thing. Over the following days, Margaret threw herself into her work. She rose before dawn, checking the kitchens, reviewing supplies, managing the daily tasks. The children adapted quickly, especially when they met Master Benedict, the elderly tutor. Pupils at last, the old man exclaimed with genuine joy. It's been so long since young voices filled these halls. Emma took to her studies immediately, showing a quick mind for numbers and letters. Even little Thomas sat quietly during lessons, absorbing more than anyone expected. James preferred the stables, where the groom was teaching him about horses. One evening, Margaret was working late in the kitchen when Sir Roderick appeared. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like a shadow. The accounts are already improving, he said. There was significant theft, my lord. I've dismissed 2 servants who were selling supplies to merchants in the valley. You didn't need my approval? You said I had full authority. I took you at your word. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Good. The staff respects strength, or they fear you'll support me. Fear and respect often walk hand in hand. He turned to leave, then paused. Your children, they're settling in? Yes, my lord. Emma especially loves her studies. She reminds Master Benedict of... Margaret stopped, remembering his reaction when she'd almost mentioned someone before. Of my sister, Roderick finished quietly. Yes, he mentioned that. She had the same hunger for knowledge. What happened to her? His jaw clenched. She died. They all died. Plague, 5 years ago. My wife, my sister, my young brother. All within a week. Margaret's breath caught. I'm so sorry. Don't be. You know what loss is. You don't offer empty platitudes. He left before she could respond. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, understanding flooding through her. The rooms they'd been given, they must have belonged to his sister. That's why they'd been closed for 5 years. The next morning brought unexpected drama. A carriage arrived bearing the local baron's wife, Lady Catherine, and her daughter, Helena. Margaret watched from a window as they swept into the courtyard, clearly expecting a grand welcome. Where is Sir Roderick? Lady Catherine demanded of William. His lordship is reviewing the garrison, my lady. Then we'll wait. She noticed Margaret at the window and her eyes narrowed. Who is that? The new household manager, my lady. Lady Catherine's expression turned calculating. Margaret had seen that look before, a woman sensing competition. When Sir Roderick finally appeared, still in his training gear and clearly irritated, Lady Catherine pounced. Roderick, darling, we've come to discuss Helena's future. There's nothing to discuss. Don't be ridiculous. The marriage contract. Died with my wife. I made that clear years ago. Helena, a pretty girl of perhaps 20, simpered. But surely you need an heir, my lord. What I need is to be left in peace. Lady Catherine's voice turned sharp. I hear you've installed some widow here. The entire valley is talking. Let them talk. It's highly improper. A woman of unknown origins, living in your castle, managing my household," Roderick interrupted coldly. "Unless you're suggesting something else?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Lady Catherine backed down slightly but wasn't finished. "At least let us meet this woman. If she's truly just a servant, you may not. Now leave." But Lady Catherine had already spotted Margaret descending the stairs. "You there! Come here." Margaret approached slowly, aware of the tension. She dropped a proper curtsy. "My lady," Lady Catherine circled her like a predator. "You're pretty enough, I suppose. Where did Roderick find you?" "I answered his lordship's offer of employment." "Employment?" Helena laughed nastily. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Margaret's cheeks burned, but before she could respond, a small voice piped up. "That's not nice." Everyone turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her little face fierce with indignation. "Children should be silent in the presence of their betters," Lady Catherine snapped. "Better at what?" Emma asked innocently. "Being mean?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, Sir Roderick laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how. "The child has a point. You are exceptionally talented at cruelty, Catherine." Lady Catherine's face turned purple. "How dare you? Leave, now, and don't return unless specifically invited." "This isn't over, Roderick. The Baron can challenge me if he wishes. I'd welcome the exercise." Mother and daughter fled in a flurry of silk and indignation. Sir Roderick looked down at Emma, who was now looking uncertain. "I'm sorry, my lord, I shouldn't have spoken. Never apologize for defending your mother." He glanced at Margaret. "Though next time, let the adults handle Lady Catherine." "Yes, my lord," Emma said, then added quietly, "but she was being horrible." "Yes," Roderick agreed, surprising them all. "She was." That evening, Margaret was tucking the children into bed when Emma asked, "Why did that lady hate us?" "She doesn't hate us, sweetheart. She's afraid." "Of what?" "Of things changing, of losing something she wants." "She wants to marry Sir Roderick?" "Her daughter does." Emma wrinkled her nose. "But he doesn't love her. Anyone can see that." Margaret smoothed her daughter's hair. "No, he doesn't. He's still sad about his wife dying, isn't he?" "I think so. Maybe he just needs a friend." Margaret's heart ached at her daughter's simple wisdom. "Maybe he does." The weeks that followed Lady Catherine's visit were tense. Merchants who'd previously been eager to trade with Ironhold suddenly claimed shortages. Delivery wagons arrived late or not at all. Margaret recognized the Baron's influence immediately. "They're trying to starve us out," she told William one morning, reviewing their dwindling supplies. "His lordship won't bend to their pressure." "No, but the staff will suffer. We need alternative suppliers." Margaret remembered the mountain villages her husband had once mentioned, places too remote for the Baron's reach. She found Sir Roderick in his study, poring over maps. "My lord, I need to visit the mountain settlements for supplies." He looked up sharply. "Those paths are dangerous. More dangerous than running out of food in winter? I'll send guards with you. That would make them suspicious. Let me go with just a driver. I'm a merchant's daughter. I know how to negotiate." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not a prisoner here. But take care. The Baron grows bolder." The mountain villages welcomed Margaret warmly, especially when she paid fair prices in real coin. She established supply lines the Baron couldn't touch, earning surprised respect from the Ironhold staff. "You've got spine," Bertha admitted grudgingly. The last manager would have folded at the first sign of trouble. But it was Sir Roderick's reaction that surprised Margaret most. She found him waiting when she returned from her third mountain trip, tension in every line of his body. "You're late. The bridge was washed out. We had to go around." He stopped, jaw clenching. The children were worried. Margaret saw through the deflection but didn't challenge it. "I'm sorry. I should have sent word. Next time take this." He handed her a horn. "It's loud enough to carry across the valley. If you're in trouble, use it." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Margaret felt unexpected warmth spread through her. Sir Roderick jerked back as if burned. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered to the kitchen for tea and found Sir Roderick there, staring into the fire. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. "I rarely do." He didn't look at her. This was Charlotte's favorite time. The castle quiet, just us talking by the fire. Margaret sat carefully across from him. "Tell me about her." "Why?" "Because keeping her memory locked away isn't helping you heal." His laugh was bitter. "I don't want to heal. The pain is all I have left of her." "That's not true. You have your memories, the love you shared. Those don't go away just because you stop hurting. You speak from experience." "Yes, my husband's death nearly destroyed me. But my children needed me to live, not just survive." Charlotte and I had no children. She was pregnant when the plague came. We lost the baby first, then her. Margaret's heart broke for him. "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. It doesn't change anything." "No," Margaret agreed. "But maybe changing things isn't the point. Maybe it's about learning to carry the grief without letting it crush you." Sir Roderick finally looked at her, and Margaret saw the raw pain in his eyes. "Some days I can barely breathe from it." Without thinking, Margaret reached across and touched his hand, then breathed through it, one breath at a time. He stared at their joined hands but didn't pull away. They sat in silence until the fire burned low, sharing their grief without words. The next morning brought chaos. James had fallen from a tree and broken his arm. Margaret found her son crying in the courtyard, Sir Roderick already kneeling beside him. "Be brave, lad," the knight said gently. "We'll get you fixed up." He carried James to the healer's room himself, staying while the bone was set. Margaret watched him distract her son with stories of his own childhood injuries, his usual coldness completely absent. "There," the healer announced, "good as new in a few weeks." Sir Roderick ruffled James's hair. "You'll have a scar. Warriors always do." "Am I a warrior now?" James asked hopefully. "The bravest 6-year-old warrior I know." Later, Margaret found Sir Roderick in the armory. "Thank you for helping James. He's a good boy. They all are. You've raised them well. They like you." He looked surprised. "I can't imagine why. Because you're kind to them. You don't pretend they're not there, like most nobles would. Children shouldn't be ignored. They see everything anyway." He paused. "Emma reminds me so much of my sister it hurts sometimes. Maybe that's not a bad thing. How can pain be good? Because it means you still feel. You haven't turned to stone, no matter what the stories say." He set down the sword he'd been polishing. "The stories also say I killed my wife." Margaret's breath caught. "Did you?" "Not with my hands, but my pride, my stubbornness. I insisted we stay when the plague came. Thought our walls could protect us. Charlotte wanted to flee to the country. If I'd listened. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? Everyone else fled, but I was too proud, too certain I could protect what was mine." His voice turned savage. "I failed everyone who trusted me." Margaret stepped closer. "You're human. Humans make mistakes. Mistakes that cost lives? Yes, even those. My husband died because I sent him to town for medicine when I was sick. If I just endured, he'd never have caught the plague. We all carry guilt, my lord. The difference is whether we let it destroy us." Sir Roderick looked at her with something like wonder. "You don't judge me. Why would I? You've shown us nothing but kindness." "Kindness." He said it like a foreign word. Catherine would laugh to hear that. Lady Catherine sees only what threatens her plans. I see a man who gave my starving children hope. The space between them seemed to shrink. Margaret could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the leather and steel that clung to him. For a moment, she thought he might, "Mama, Mama!" Thomas's voice shattered the moment. "Look what Master Benedict taught me." Her youngest son burst in, proudly holding up a slate with shaky letters spelling his name. Sir Roderick stepped back immediately, the walls slamming back into place. "Well done, Thomas," he said formally, then strode away. Margaret hugged her son, her heart still racing. What had almost happened? And why did she wish it had? Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Ironhold in snow. The castle, which had seemed dark and forbidding in autumn, became almost magical under its white covering. The children were delighted, especially when Sir Roderick gave them permission to sled on the South Hill. Margaret watched from a window as they played, surprised when Sir Roderick appeared beside them, pulling a larger sled. "Your children are convincing," he said when he caught her staring. "Emma said I looked sad watching from the battlements." "And that convinced you?" "She threatened to build a snow knight to keep me company if I didn't join them." Margaret laughed, a real laugh that made him stop and stare. "What? I haven't heard you laugh like that before. It's pleasant." Heat crept up her cheeks. "I haven't had much reason to laugh lately." "Nor I. Perhaps we should remedy that." Before she could respond, Emma called out, "Mama, come sledding with us." "I couldn't. I have work." "The work will keep," Sir Roderick interrupted. "Your children want you." Margaret found herself trudging through the snow, her worn boots immediately soaked. Sir Roderick noticed and frowned. "Why didn't you say you needed new boots? These are fine. They're falling apart. You'll catch your death." He turned to William. "Have the cobbler come tomorrow. The entire family needs winter clothes." "My lord, I can't accept. You're my household manager. You represent Ironhold. You'll be properly attired." But his eyes were soft, betraying the real reason. Margaret's pride wanted to refuse, but Thomas was already shivering in his thin coat. For them, she'd accept anything. That evening, as she tucked the children in, Emma asked, "Do you like Sir Roderick, Mama? He's a good lord. Kind and fair." "That's not what I meant." Margaret smoothed her daughter's hair. "What did you mean?" "He looks at you the way Papa used to, when he thought no one was watching." "You're imagining things, sweetheart." But Emma shook her head. "And you look at him the same way." Margaret's heart clenched. From the mouths of babes. "Sleep now. It's late." She retreated to her sitting room, only to find a package waiting. Inside were new boots, soft leather, and perfectly sized. A note in Sir Roderick's sharp handwriting read, "For the snow, R." Margaret held the boots, fighting tears. Such a simple gesture, but when did anyone last care for her comfort? A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Sir Roderick entered, looking uncomfortable. "Do they fit? How did you know my size?" I asked Emma. "I hope you don't mind. They're beautiful, but I really can't. Please." His voice was rough. "Let me do this small thing. You've brought order to my home, life to these halls. It's the least I can offer. You've already given us everything." "No." He moved closer. "Not everything." The air between them charged with possibility. Margaret's breath caught as he reached out, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "I swore I'd never. Charlotte was everything to me." "I understand. Do you? Because I find myself thinking things I shouldn't, feeling things I thought died with her." "What things?" Margaret whispered. "Dangerous things. Hope, warmth, the desire to be more than a ghost in my own castle. That's not dangerous. That's living. I don't know how anymore." "Then learn. One day at a time." He cupped her face gently. "You make it sound simple." "Not simple. Necessary." For a heartbeat, she thought he'd kiss her. Then voices echoed from the hall servants passing by. Sir Roderick stepped back, the moment shattered. "Forgive me. I shouldn't have." "There's nothing to forgive." He fled before she could say more. Margaret touched her cheek where his fingers had been, wondering if she'd imagined the tenderness in his touch. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. The Baron himself arrived with a small army of guards. Margaret quickly gathered the children, but Sir Roderick stopped her. "Stay. Let them see you stand with me." The Baron was a thick man with cold eyes. "Roderick, we need to discuss your recent defiance." "There's nothing to discuss. You insulted my wife. Rejected my daughter. Your wife insulted my household. Your daughter has no claim here. The marriage contract ended with Charlotte's death, as you well know." The Baron's gaze found Margaret. "Ah, the infamous widow. Pretty enough, I suppose. Is she worth making an enemy of me? She's my household manager, nothing more." "Really? The whole valley says otherwise." Sir Roderick's hand moved to his sword. "The valley says many things. Most are lies. Some say you killed your wife to be free." The temperature seemed to drop. Margaret saw rage flash across Sir Roderick's face, quickly controlled. "Say that again," he said quietly. "Please, give me a reason." The Baron backed down slightly. I simply repeat what I hear. Then hear this. Anyone who spreads such filth will answer to me personally. You can't fight the entire valley, Roderick. Watch me. The Baron turned to Margaret. You should leave while you can, woman. This place is cursed. Everyone who comes here dies. Then I'll take my chances, Margaret said steadily. Better a cursed castle than a cruel valley. The Baron's face reddened. You dare. She dares because she stands under my protection, Sir Roderick interrupted. As do her children. Remember that. This isn't over. This isn't over. It never is with you. After the Baron left, Sir Roderick turned to Margaret. You should have stayed quiet. I won't hide while you defend us. You don't understand what you've done. The Baron won't forget this insult. Good. Neither will I. He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You're either very brave or very foolish. Both, probably. That's what worries me. But there was warmth in his eyes. That night, Margaret woke to shouting. She ran to the courtyard to find the stables ablaze. The horses were screaming, the staff forming bucket lines. Sir Roderick was already inside, leading horses out. Without thinking, Margaret grabbed a bucket and joined the line. Emma appeared beside her. Get your brothers to safety, Margaret ordered. We want to help, then help by staying safe. The fire raged for hours. By dawn, the stables were destroyed, though no lives were lost. Sir Roderick stood among the ruins, covered in soot and burns. The Baron, he said flatly. William nodded. The guards saw riders fleeing. Margaret approached with salve for his burns. Let me help. He sat heavily on a broken beam, letting her tend his wounds. His hands were badly burned from handling hot metal and rope. This is my fault, Margaret said quietly. No. This is the Baron showing his true nature. But if I hadn't spoken, then he would have found another excuse. Men like him always do. She wrapped his hands carefully. What will you do? Rebuild. What else is there? You could report him to the king. The king cares nothing for mountain disputes. Then we endure, we survive. There's a difference. Margaret tied off the bandage. I'm sorry about the horses. They're alive. That's what matters. He caught her hand. You were brave tonight. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Their eyes met and held. Margaret became aware they were being watched servants, trying not to stare. She pulled away. Your hands need daily treatment. Shall I send the healer? No. You do it. People will talk more. Let them. His voice dropped. I find I care less about their opinions every day. The attempt to rebuild the stables was interrupted by more sabotage. Supply wagons were attacked on the mountain roads. The cobbler who'd made their boots was threatened and fled the valley. Each day brought new challenges, yet Sir Roderick refused to yield. Margaret found him one evening in the ruined stables, sketching plans by lamplight. You should rest. Your hands haven't healed properly. There's too much to do. She took the charcoal from him gently. Tell me what you envision. I'll draw. They worked together through the night, planning not just stables but improvements to the entire castle. Margaret suggested defensive positions that surprised him. How does a merchant's daughter know about fortification? My father traded with military outposts. I listened more than anyone realized. You're full of surprises. As are you. The terrifying Sir Roderick who reads stories to Thomas when he has nightmares. He looked startled. How did you? Thomas told me. He says you do better voices than I do. The boy was crying. I happened to be passing. 3 nights in a row? He shrugged, embarrassed. I don't sleep anyway. Margaret's heart ached for this complex man who tried so hard to hide his kindness. You're good with them. They're easy to be good to. Innocent. Untainted by the world's cruelty. You could have children of your own someday. His expression shuddered. No. That chance died with Charlotte. You're still young. Please. The word was barely a whisper. Don't. Margaret wanted to argue, to tell him that Charlotte wouldn't want him entombed in grief. But she recognized the rawness of his pain and stayed silent. The next morning, Master Benedict collapsed during lessons. The old tutor was burning with fever, barely conscious. The healer looked grim. It's his heart. And at his age. I'm sorry, my lord. Sir Roderick knelt beside his old teacher's bed. Benedict taught me everything. Letters, numbers, honor. He was more father than tutor. Emma crept in, tears streaming. Is he dying? Yes, child, Sir Roderick said gently. But he was going to teach me Latin. Despite everything, Benedict's eyes fluttered open. Still, can, he wheezed. Don't try to speak, Sir Roderick urged. But Benedict looked at Emma. You. Remind me. Of her. Lady Catherine. Not. That one. Roderick's. Sister. She was smart? Emma asked. Brilliant. Like you. Benedict's gaze found Sir Roderick. You've been dead. Too long. This one. He looked at Margaret. She brings life. Don't waste it. Those were his last coherent words. He lingered 3 more days, with Margaret and the children taking turns reading to him. When he finally passed, Emma sobbed in Margaret's arms. It's not fair. He was nice. I know, sweetheart. The good ones always leave too soon. Sir Roderick arranged a beautiful funeral, burying Benedict in the family plot, an honor usually reserved for blood relations. At the graveside, he spoke quietly. He saved me after my parents died, gave me purpose, direction. I failed him these past 5 years, becoming exactly what he warned against, a man consumed by bitterness. Margaret touched his arm. You're changing. He saw that. Too late. No. Just in time. That night, Sir Roderick found Margaret in Benedict's study, sorting through his books. I want Emma to have these. All of them? Benedict would want them used, not gathering dust. He pulled out a slim volume. This was Catherine's, my sister's favorite. She read it so often the pages are worn. Margaret opened it carefully, finding notes in a young girl's handwriting. Emma will treasure this. Catherine would have loved her, loved all of them. He sat heavily. This castle was full of children once. My siblings, visiting cousins. Charlotte wanted to fill it with our own. It could be again. He looked at her sharply. What are you saying? Margaret's courage faltered. Just that. Life continues. Even after loss. Not all life. Not the one I planned. No. But maybe a different one. Maybe even a good one. Sir Roderick stood abruptly. I need to check the guards. But Margaret caught his sleeve. Stop running. I'm not. Every time we get close to something real, you flee. Because something real would betray Charlotte. Would it? Or would letting yourself die inside betray her love for you? He pulled free. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I loved her completely, without reservation. When she died, that part of me died too. Yet, here you are, teaching Thomas to read, comforting Emma, showing James how to hold a sword. That's not a dead man. It's not enough. For whom? Charlotte? Or for the woman standing in front of you? The question hung between them. Sir Roderick's jaw worked, but no words came. Margaret stepped back. I'm sorry, I've overstepped. No, you've said what needed saying. I need time. Time. Margaret nodded, though her heart sank. How much time did any of them have? The answer came sooner than expected. A messenger arrived the next morning, bearing the Baron's seal. Sir Roderick read it, his face darkening. What is it? Margaret asked. The Baron's filed a formal complaint with the king. He claims I've broken the marriage contract and demands compensation or fulfillment. Can he force you to marry Helena? Not directly, but if the king sides with him, I could lose Ironhold. Margaret's blood ran cold. He can't. He can, if I can't prove the contract void. Sir Roderick crumpled the message. I need to go to court. Argue my case. Then go. We'll manage here. No. It's not safe. The Baron will strike the moment I leave. Then take us with you. He stared at her. To court? A widow and 3 children? Your household manager and her family. It's perfectly proper. The nobles will tear you apart. Let them try. Sir Roderick studied her face. You'd face the royal court for me? For Ironhold? For our home? Something flickered in his eyes at our. It would be dangerous. More dangerous than staying here alone? He considered, then nodded slowly. We leave in 3 days. Prepare yourself, Margaret. Court court is nothing like the valley. It's far crueler. The journey to court took a week through winter roads. Margaret had never traveled so far from home, and despite the circumstances, she found herself marveling at the changing landscape. The children pressed their faces to the carriage windows, pointing excitedly at everything new. Sir Roderick rode alongside them, his presence both protective and distant. He'd barely spoken since they'd left Ironhold, retreating into himself as they drew closer to the capital. The city overwhelmed Margaret's senses when they finally arrived. Buildings towered higher than she'd imagined possible, and the streets teemed with more people than lived in her entire valley. The palace itself stole her breath, a massive structure of white stone and gold that seemed to touch the clouds. Sir Roderick had secured lodgings in a respectable inn near the palace, refusing to stay with any noble families who offered. "They offer shelter with one hand and hold a knife with the other," he explained tersely. Their first appearance at court was for the preliminary hearing. Margaret dressed carefully in the new gown Sir Roderick had insisted on purchasing, trying to calm her nerves. Emma helped with her hair while the boys polished their boots until they shone. When Sir Roderick saw them assembled, something soft crossed his face before the mask returned. He looked magnificent in his formal attire, every inch the powerful lord, yet Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. The throne room was a sea of silk and jewels. Hundreds of nobles gathered to witness the proceedings. Margaret felt their eyes like physical weight, heard the whispers ripple through the crowd. She lifted her chin higher and kept her children close, refusing to show fear. The Baron was already there with Lady Catherine and Helena, all dressed in their finest and looking smugly confident. The king entered with great ceremony, and Margaret got her first look at the man who held their fate. He was younger than she'd expected, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When his gaze swept over their small group, he paused, clearly curious about the widow and children accompanying the notorious recluse knight. The Baron presented his case first, producing the original marriage contract with theatrical flourish. He painted Sir Roderick as an oath-breaker who'd spurned his innocent daughter for a common widow. Lady Catherine dabbed at fake tears, while Helena played the rejected maiden perfectly, though Margaret noticed her shooting venomous glares when she thought no one was looking. When Sir Roderick's turn came, he argued clearly and logically that the contract had been dissolved with Charlotte's death, as was standard in such agreements. But the Baron had anticipated this, producing witnesses who claimed Sir Roderick had verbally renewed the promise after Charlotte's funeral. It was a lie, but the witnesses seemed credible. Margaret saw Sir Roderick's hands clench and feared he might challenge someone to combat right there. The king raised his hand for silence. "This matter requires further consideration. We will reconvene in 1 week for additional testimony." His eyes found Margaret. "All members of both households will be expected to attend." As they left the throne room, Helena deliberately bumped into Emma, sending the child sprawling. Before Margaret could react, Sir Roderick was there, lifting Emma gently and fixing Helena with a stare that could freeze blood. Helena stumbled back, suddenly afraid, and the entire court saw it. Whispers exploded through the crowd about the cold knight's protective gesture toward the merchant child. That evening in their lodgings, Margaret found Sir Roderick on the small balcony, staring at the city lights. She joined him quietly, noticing how tired he looked. The formal proceedings were draining him in ways battle never had. "They're lying," she said simply. "Of course they are. But proving it is another matter. There must be witnesses who know the truth, dead or bought. The Baron's been planning this for years." He turned to her, and in the moonlight she could see his vulnerability. "I might lose Ironhold. You won't. We won't let that happen." "We?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "You have such faith in justice." "No, I have faith in you, and in the truth having a way of surfacing when needed most." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, it made her heart race. "You shouldn't have come. Court will destroy your reputation." "I have no reputation to destroy. I'm nobody, remember? You're not nobody. You're—" He stopped, struggling with words. "You're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to fight for something beyond mere survival." Margaret covered his hand with hers. "Then fight. Not just for Ironhold, but for the future. For the life Benedict said you were wasting." What if I've forgotten how to live? Then I'll remind you. Every day if necessary. He pulled her closer, his other hand cupping her face. Margaret, A crash from inside interrupted them. They rushed in to find Thomas crying over a broken water pitcher, James trying to clean up the mess. The intimate moment shattered, but as Sir Roderick helped calm Thomas, Margaret saw Emma watching with knowing eyes. Her daughter smiled secretly and whispered, "He was going to kiss you." The next few days were torture. Every appearance at court brought new humiliations. Nobles accidentally spilled wine on Margaret's dress. Servants were instructed to ignore her requests. The children were mocked for their common clothing and valley accents. Sir Roderick grew more furious with each insult, but Margaret held him back. They want you to react, to prove you're the violent monster they claim. But everything changed when an unexpected ally appeared. An elderly duchess approached them after a particularly nasty encounter with Lady Catherine. Margaret recognized her as one of the most powerful women at court, the king's own great-aunt. "You must be the widow causing such delightful chaos," the duchess said, her eyes twinkling. Margaret curtsied deeply. "Your Grace." "Oh, stop that. I want to talk properly." She studied Margaret with sharp intelligence. "You know, I knew Charlotte. Lovely girl. She wrote to me about you, Roderick." Sir Roderick went still. "She did?" "Indeed. Said you were the finest man she'd ever known. Said your love gave her strength through the plague." The Duchess turned to Margaret. "She also wrote something interesting in her last letter, something about hoping you'd find love again after she was gone, that she couldn't bear thinking of you alone forever." Tears filled Sir Roderick's eyes. "She said that? I have the letter if you'd like proof. Might be useful, considering the Baron's claims about promises made at her funeral. Hard to promise marriage to another when your dying wife's last wish was for you to find new love, isn't it?" Hope sparked in Margaret's chest. "You'd testify? My dear, I'd do more than that. I despise the Baron. He once tried to force my own granddaughter into marriage. It's time someone put him in his place." She patted Emma's head. "Besides, any child brave enough to call Lady Catherine mean to her face deserves my support." Emma blushed. "You heard about that?" "Everyone heard, child. You've become quite the little legend." The final hearing arrived with the weight of destiny. The throne room was packed, everyone eager to witness the conclusion of the drama. The Duchess had been busy all week, and Margaret noticed several nobles who'd previously shunned them now nodding respectfully. Whatever the Duchess had done or said had shifted the court's opinion. The Baron presented his case again, but this time Sir Roderick was ready. He produced Charlotte's letters, not just to the Duchess, but to others, all expressing her wish for him to find happiness after her death. The witnesses who'd claimed he'd made promises at the funeral began to stammer and contradict themselves under questioning. It became clear they'd been paid or threatened. Then the Duchess herself took the floor, her voice carrying the authority of decades at court. "Your Majesty, I've watched this farce long enough. The Baron seeks to steal through lies what he cannot earn through merit. Sir Roderick owes him nothing. Moreover, I believe he's found exactly what his late wife hoped he would, a new chance at happiness." She gestured to Margaret and the children. "This woman has brought life back to a man we all thought lost to grief. These children have filled halls that stood silent for too long. If that's not worthy of protection and respect, then this court has lost its way." The king leaned forward, his eyes moving between Sir Roderick and Margaret. "Sir Roderick, is this woman the reason you refused the Baron's daughter?" For a moment, Sir Roderick hesitated. Then he stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "No, Your Majesty. I refuse because the contract is void and Helena holds no appeal for me. But if you're asking if Margaret is important to me, then yes, she and her children have become essential." The court gasped at the admission. Margaret felt her heart might burst from her chest. The Baron's face turned purple with rage. "This is absurd. A noble lord cannot simply—" "Cannot what?" the king interrupted. "Cannot choose his own path? Cannot honor his late wife's wishes? Cannot refuse a match based on greed and manipulation?" He stood, his judgment ringing through the hall. "I find in favor of Sir Roderick. The marriage contract is void. The Baron will cease all harassment immediately or face royal censure." The Baron sputtered, but Lady Catherine grabbed his arm, recognizing defeat. Helena burst into tears, though Margaret suspected it was more from embarrassment than heartbreak. As the court dispersed, Sir Roderick turned to Margaret, his eyes holding a question she wasn't quite ready to answer. Not here, not with everyone watching. The journey home to Ironhold was different from the journey out. The children chattered excitedly about their adventure, about the Duchess who'd invited them to visit again, about the king himself saying Sir Roderick was in the right. But between Margaret and Sir Roderick, there was a new tension, an awareness that his public declaration had changed something fundamental between them. On the last night before reaching home, they stopped at the same inn where they'd stayed on the way to court. After the children were asleep, Margaret found Sir Roderick in the inn's small garden, snow beginning to fall around him. "You declared me essential," she said softly. "You are. What does that mean exactly?" He turned to face her fully. "It means I've been a fool. It means I've spent months fighting feelings I should have embraced. It means Charlotte was right. I've been wasting my life mourning instead of living. And now I want to live. With you. With the children." He stepped closer. "If you'll have me." Margaret's breath caught. "Roderick, I love you." The words rushed out like water breaking through a dam. "Not the way I loved Charlotte. That was young love, untested and innocent. This is different, stronger, born from understanding and shared strength. You've seen me at my worst and still stand beside me. I love you too," Margaret whispered. "But no buts, not anymore." He cradled her face in his hands. "Marry me. People will say I'm a fortune hunter, that I seduced you. Let them say what they want. We know the truth. The children already call Ironhold home. Thomas asked me yesterday if he could call me Papa." His voice broke slightly. "I didn't know what to say." "What did you tell him? That he should ask his mother first?" Margaret laughed through her tears. "You beautiful, complicated man. Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, she pulled him down and kissed him. It was nothing like she'd imagined, not gentle or tentative, but fierce with months of denied longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." The wedding took place in Ironhold's chapel on the first day of spring. The Duchess came from court, bringing half the nobility with her out of sheer curiosity. The Baron and his family were pointedly not invited. Margaret wore Charlotte's wedding dress, altered to fit her. Sir Roderick had insisted, saying Charlotte would have wanted it. The children served as attendants, Thomas carrying the rings with such solemnity that several guests had to hide their smiles. As Sir Roderick placed the ring on Margaret's finger, he spoke the traditional vows, but then added his own. "You brought me back from the dead. You gave me reason to hope again. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for whatever time we're granted." Margaret responded through tears. "You gave us sanctuary when the world turned away. You showed my children that kindness exists even in dark places. I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you when you need it, and to love you without reservation." When they kissed, the chapel erupted in cheers. Emma, James, and Thomas rushed to embrace them both, and Sir Roderick lifted Thomas onto his shoulders, the boys' delighted laughter echoing off the stone walls. The Duchess wiped away tears, muttering about how she was too old for such sentiment while clearly loving every moment. The feast that followed was legendary. The great hall of Ironhold had been transformed with flowers and candles, musicians played, and for the first time in 5 years, the castle rang with joy. Sir Roderick danced with Margaret, then with Emma, even letting little Thomas stand on his feet for a silly jig that had everyone laughing. The servants, who'd grown to love Margaret over the months, celebrated like it was their own family's happiness. William pulled Margaret aside during the festivities. "My lady, or should I say, my proper lady, now you've done something miraculous. You've brought him back to life. He was never dead, William. Just lost. And you found him." The old steward smiled. Charlotte would be so pleased. As the night grew late and the guests began retiring, Sir Roderick and Margaret stood on the battlements, looking out over their domain. The children had finally collapsed from excitement and been carried to bed. For the first time, they were alone as husband and wife. "Are you happy?" Roderick asked, pulling her close. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Even though you're now the lady of a cursed castle?" Margaret laughed. "It doesn't feel very cursed anymore." "No," he agreed. It doesn't. He kissed her temple. You broke the curse, Margaret. You and the children. You filled this place with love again. We all saved each other, she corrected. That's what family does. As if summoned by the word, 3 small figures appeared in the doorway. Emma, James, and Thomas stood there in their nightclothes, looking hopeful. We couldn't sleep, Emma explained. Too excited, James added. Thomas just held up his arms to Roderick, who lifted him easily. Can we watch the stars? Thomas asked. As a family? Margaret and Roderick exchanged glances, both smiling. Of course, they said together. They settled on the battlements, blankets wrapped around them against the cool night air. Thomas curled in Roderick's lap, already calling him Papa. James leaned against Margaret's side while Emma pointed out constellations Master Benedict had taught her about. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, blessing the new family below. Tell us a story, Papa, Thomas demanded sleepily. Roderick looked momentarily stunned at the easy use of the title, then began. Once upon a time, there was a knight who thought his heart had turned to stone. But then a brave lady and her 3 children came and made it warm again, Emma supplied. Exactly right, Roderick agreed, his voice thick with emotion. As his deep voice wove the tale their tale, Margaret realized this was what happiness truly meant. Not the absence of sorrow or struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to transform pain into joy. The hungry widow who'd once despaired of feeding her children was now lady of a great castle. The knight who'd buried himself in grief had found new purpose and love, and 3 children who'd faced starvation now had a future bright with possibility. The story Roderick told grew more fanciful as Thomas's eyes grew heavier, with dragons and magic and triumphant heroes. But Margaret knew the real story was even better. Because real love wasn't about fairy tale perfection. It was about choosing each other through storm and struggle, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about finding family in unexpected places. As the children finally drifted off to sleep and were carried once more to their beds, Margaret and Roderick stood together in their castle, no longer a monument to grief, but a home filled with hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Baron might scheme again. The world would certainly gossip. But tonight, in this moment, they were complete. I love you, Roderick whispered against her hair. My unexpected salvation. And I love you, Margaret replied. My unlikely knight. They stayed there until dawn painted the mountains gold, the first sunrise of their new life together. And if anyone had been watching from the valley below, they would have seen Ironhold blazing with light. No longer the dark fortress of rumors, but a beacon of what love could build when given the chance to flourish. The hungry widow had said, "Take my children," out of desperation. But the knight had seen the greater truth in taking them all. He had saved not just them, but himself. And in return, they had given him the greatest gift of all, a reason to live again, to love again, and to believe that even after the darkest night, dawn would always come. The journey to court took a week through winter roads that seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Margaret had never traveled so far from home, and despite the dire circumstances that drove them forward, she found herself marveling at how the landscape transformed with each passing day. Mountains gave way to rolling hills, then to vast plains dotted with villages larger than any she'd known. The children pressed their faces against the carriage windows, pointing excitedly at everything new, a windmill, turning lazily in the distance, a river wider than their entire valley, merchants with strange wares from distant lands. Sir Roderick rode alongside their carriage, his dark figure a constant, protective presence against the unknown dangers of the road. Yet Margaret noticed how he grew more withdrawn with each mile that brought them closer to the capital, retreating into himself like a warrior donning invisible armor. She understood without words that returning to court meant facing memories he'd fled 5 years ago, when he'd last been there with Charlotte. The capital city burst upon Margaret's senses like a physical blow when they finally passed through its towering gates. Buildings rose higher than she'd imagined possible, their windows glinting like eyes in the afternoon sunday. The streets teemed with more people than lived in her entire valley, merchants, hawking wares in languages she didn't recognize. Nobles carried in gilded chairs above the crowd, beggars and thieves darting between the legs of travelers. The noise was overwhelming after the quiet of Ironhold, and she saw her children shrink back initially, intimidated by the chaos. But Sir Roderick had prepared well for their arrival. He'd secured lodgings in a respectable inn near the palace, refusing all offers from noble families who suddenly remembered their friendship now that scandal brought him back to court. "They offer shelter with one hand while sharpening knives with the other," he explained tersely when Margaret questioned the expense. The inn was modest but clean, and most importantly, it was neutral ground where they could retreat from the battlefield that court would surely become. Their first appearance at court was scheduled for the preliminary hearing, and Margaret dressed with shaking hands in the new gown Sir Roderick had insisted on purchasing. It was finer than anything she'd ever owned, deep blue silk that caught the light, making her appear more noble than merchant-born. Emma helped pin her mother's hair into an elegant style they'd practiced, while the boys polished their new boots until they could see their reflections. When Sir Roderick saw them assembled in the inn's common room, something soft and wondering crossed his face before his court mask slammed back into place. He looked magnificent and terrifying in his formal attire, every inch the powerful lord who'd once commanded armies. Yet Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept moving to where his sword should rest, but weapons weren't permitted in the throne room. They climbed into the carriage for the short ride to the palace, and Margaret caught his hand briefly, squeezing it once before propriety forced her to let go. "We stand together," she whispered, and saw him nod minutely, drawing strength from her words. The throne room was a sea of silk and jewels that seemed to ripple and whisper like a living thing. Hundreds of nobles had gathered to witness the proceedings, drawn by the delicious scandal of the reclusive knight and his mysterious widow. Margaret felt their eyes like physical touches, evaluating her dress, her bearing, her children, finding her wanting in 1,000 tiny ways. She heard the whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. Merchant's daughter, husband died of plague, barely better than a servant. What spell did she cast on him? She lifted her chin higher and kept her children close, her hand resting protectively on Thomas's shoulder, while Emma and James flanked her other side. They were a small island in an ocean of hostility, but Margaret refused to show fear. She'd faced starvation and desperation. These overdressed peacocks couldn't frighten her. The Baron was already positioned near the throne with Lady Catherine and Helena, all dressed in their finest court attire, looking smugly confident. Helena wore white, Margaret noticed with bitter amusement, the color of innocence and virgin brides, a not-so-subtle reminder of what Sir Roderick was supposedly spurning. The king entered with great ceremony, and Margaret got her first look at the man who held their fate in his manicured hands. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. His gaze swept over the assembled nobles with practiced boredom until it reached their small group, where it paused with obvious curiosity. Margaret realized they must make an odd picture, the notorious recluse knight who'd hidden from society for 5 years, accompanied by a common-born widow and 3 children who clearly didn't belong in such grand surroundings. The king's expression gave nothing away, but Margaret thought she saw interest spark in his eyes before he turned his attention to the matter at hand. The Baron was called forward first to present his case, and he did so with theatrical flourish that would have been amusing if their future didn't hang in the balance. The Baron produced the original marriage contract with a showman's timing, holding it high so all could see the official seals. His voice carried across the throne room as he painted Sir Roderick as an oathbreaker who'd callously spurned his innocent daughter for a scheming widow. He implied, without quite stating, that Margaret had seduced Sir Roderick, possibly through witchcraft or other unsavory means. Lady Catherine dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though Margaret noticed no actual tears fell. Helena played the rejected maiden perfectly, keeping her eyes downcast and her lower lip trembling just enough to garner sympathy. But Margaret caught the venomous glares the girl shot their way when she thought no one was watching. Filled with such hatred, it made Margaret instinctively pull her children closer. The Baron's witnesses testified one after another, each claiming to have heard Sir Roderick renew his promise to marry Helena after Charlotte's funeral. It was all lies, Margaret knew. But the witnesses seemed credible, minor nobles and merchants, who had no obvious reason to fabricate such claims. When Sir Roderick's turn came to respond, he argued with cold logic that the contract had been dissolved upon Charlotte's death, as was standard in such agreements. He presented documents showing the specific language of the contract, which clearly stated it was binding only during Charlotte's lifetime. But the Baron had anticipated this defense, and his witnesses remained firm in their testimony that Sir Roderick had verbally renewed the commitment. Margaret saw Sir Roderick's hands clench into fists, his control hanging by a thread. For a moment, she feared he might challenge someone to single combat right there in the throne room, which would only confirm the Baron's characterization of him as violent and unstable. She shifted slightly, just enough for her movement to catch his eye, and saw him force his hands to relax. The king watched it all with hooded eyes, giving no indication of his thoughts. Finally, the king raised his hand for silence, and the throne room fell quiet instantly. "This matter requires further consideration," he announced in a voice that carried despite its calm tone. "We will reconvene in 1 week for additional testimony. All parties will remain in the capital until the matter is resolved." His gaze moved deliberately to Margaret and her children. "All members of both households will be expected to attend." The dismissal was clear, and the crowd began to disperse, but not before Helena deliberately bumped into Emma as they passed, sending the 8-year-old sprawling across the polished marble floor. Margaret started forward, but Sir Roderick was already there, lifting Emma with gentle hands and checking her for injury. Then he turned to Helena with a stare that could have frozen flame. The girl stumbled backward, suddenly afraid, and the entire court saw it, saw the cold knight's protective tenderness toward a common child, saw Helena's petty cruelty, saw the fear in her eyes when confronted. Whispers exploded through the crowd as nobles processed what they'd witnessed, the story already shifting and growing as it passed from mouth to mouth. That evening in their lodgings, Margaret found Sir Roderick standing on the small balcony that overlooked the city, his shoulders rigid with tension. She joined him quietly, not speaking at first, just standing beside him as the city's lights began to twinkle in the gathering darkness. The capital never truly slept. She'd learned even now she could hear distant music, laughter, the clip-clop of horses on cobblestones. "They're lying," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. He didn't respond immediately, his jaw working as he struggled with words. "Of course they're lying," he said at last. "But proving it is another matter entirely. The Baron has had years to plan this, to buy or threaten witnesses, to craft a story that sounds plausible to those who don't know better." Margaret could hear the despair creeping into his voice, the fear he wouldn't show in public. "There must be witnesses who know the truth," she insisted. "People who were actually at Charlotte's funeral, who know you made no such promise." Sir Roderick's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Dead or bought, every one. The Baron is nothing if not thorough." Margaret moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool night air. "Then we'll find another way. We always do." He turned to look at her then, and in the moonlight she could see his vulnerability, the fear he'd never show in daylight. "I might lose Ironhold," he admitted. "Everything my family built over centuries. Gone because I refused to marry a viper." Margaret reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "You won't lose it. We won't let that happen." He covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. "We?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "You have such faith in justice prevailing." She shook her head. "No, I have faith in you, and in the truth having a way of surfacing when needed most. The Baron may have planned for years, but he's counting on you being alone, friendless, with no one to stand beside you. He didn't count on us." Sir Roderick's expression shifted, something raw and desperate flickering in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come. Court will destroy your reputation. They'll call you terrible things, say you're a fortune hunter who preyed on a grieving widower. Your children will suffer for my battles." Margaret turned to face him fully, her hands moving to rest on his chest. "I'm nobody, remember? I have no reputation to destroy. And my children have already suffered poverty, hunger, the loss of their father. What are cruel words compared to that?" She felt his heart racing beneath her palms. "Besides, they've also learned that sometimes you have to fight for what matters, even when the odds are against you. You taught them that." "I've taught them nothing but violence and bitterness," he said harshly. "No," Margaret contradicted firmly. "You've taught Thomas that even strong men can be gentle. You've taught James that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. You've taught Emma that intelligence and learning matter more than birthright. And you've taught me." She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the intensity in his eyes. "What have I taught you?" he asked, his voice rough. "That it's possible to live again after loss. That choosing happiness isn't a betrayal of the past, but an honor to it." He reached out then, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "You're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to fight for something beyond mere survival," he admitted. "The first person who's made me remember what hope feels like." Margaret covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "Then fight, not just for Ironhold, but for the future. For the life Benedict said you were wasting." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "What if I've forgotten how to live? What if I'm too broken, too bitter?" She smiled softly. "Then I'll remind you. Every day if necessary. As many times as it takes." He pulled her closer then, his other hand coming up to frame her face. "Margaret, But before he could finish, a crash from inside interrupted them. They rushed in to find Thomas crying over a broken water pitcher, the ceramic shards scattered across the floor, while James tried frantically to clean up the mess with his nightshirt. The intimate moment shattered, but as Sir Roderick knelt to comfort Thomas, helping clean up without a word of reproach, Margaret caught Emma watching from the doorway with knowing eyes. Her daughter smiled secretly and whispered just loud enough for her mother to hear, "He was going to kiss you." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks but couldn't deny the truth of it, or the disappointment that the moment had passed. The next few days were torture in ways Margaret hadn't anticipated. Every appearance at court brought new humiliations, each one carefully calculated to seem accidental. Nobles accidentally spilled wine on Margaret's dress, forcing her to spend precious coins on cleaning. Servants were instructed to ignore her requests, leaving them waiting for food or assistance until Sir Roderick's temper flared. The children were mocked for their common clothing and valley accents, with noble children making exaggerated imitations of their speech. One particularly vicious young lord made Thomas cry by saying his mother was a whore who'd trapped Sir Roderick with witchcraft. James had punched the boy before anyone could stop him, leading to more whispers about the violent tendencies of the widow's savage children. Sir Roderick grew more furious with each insult, his hand constantly moving to where his sword should be, and Margaret found herself spending most of her energy keeping him from doing something that would prove the Baron's characterization correct. "They want you to react," she told him after a particularly nasty encounter where Lady Catherine had loudly wondered if Margaret's children were even her late husband's. "They want you to prove you're the violent monster they claim." Sir Roderick's jaw was so tight she feared he might crack teeth. "How do you stand it? How do you not want to destroy them all?" Margaret thought of all the times she'd been dismissed, overlooked, discounted because of her common birth. "Because giving them that power over me means they've won. My worth doesn't come from their approval. Neither does yours." He stared at her with something like wonder. "You're stronger than any warrior I've commanded." She laughed softly. "No, I'm just a mother who's learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply surviving with your dignity intact." Everything changed when an unexpected ally appeared on their 4th day at court. They were leaving the palace after another round of testimonies that had gone nowhere when an elderly woman approached them. Margaret recognized her immediately, the Duchess of Winterhold, the king's own great-aunt and one of the most powerful women in the realm. She was ancient but moved with surprising grace, her silver hair crowned with a simple circlet that somehow seemed more regal than all the elaborate headdresses surrounding them. "You must be the widow causing such delightful chaos," the Duchess said, her eyes twinkling with what looked like genuine amusement. Margaret dropped into a deep curtsy while pulling her children down with her. "Your Grace." "Oh, stop all that bowing and scraping," the Duchess said impatiently. "I want to talk properly, not to the top of your head. Rise, all of you." She studied Margaret with sharp intelligence that reminded Margaret of a hawk evaluating prey. "You know, I knew Charlotte quite well. Lovely girl. We corresponded regularly." She turned her gaze to Sir Roderick, who'd gone very still. "She wrote to me about you, Roderick. Frequently." Something in the Duchess's tone made the surrounding nobles step back, suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. She did? Sir Roderick's voice was carefully controlled. Indeed. She said you were the finest man she'd ever known. Said your love gave her strength through the plague, that knowing you were there made the pain bearable. The Duchess paused, her expression softening. She also wrote something interesting in her last letter, something about hoping you'd find love again after she was gone, that she couldn't bear thinking of you alone forever. Tears filled Sir Roderick's eyes, though he blinked them back quickly. She said that? His voice broke slightly on the words. I have the letter if you'd like proof, the Duchess said gently. Charlotte asked me to watch over you, to make sure you didn't bury yourself with her. I'm afraid I've done a poor job of it until now. She turned back to Margaret. But it seems you've managed what I couldn't. You've brought him back to life. Margaret felt hope spark in her chest like a flame catching dry kindling. Your Grace, would you testify to this? The Baron claimed Sir Roderick made promises at Charlotte's funeral. Lies, the Duchess said flatly. I was at that funeral. Roderick could barely stand, much less make promises about future marriages. He had to be practically carried from the graveyard. She studied them all for a moment. The Baron has overplayed his hand this time. He once tried to force my own granddaughter into marriage. It's time someone put him in his place. She patted Emma's head with a gnarled but gentle hand. Besides, any child brave enough to call Lady Catherine mean to her face deserves my support. Emma's eyes widened. You heard about that? The Duchess laughed, a surprisingly rich sound. My dear child, everyone heard. You've become quite the little legend. The servant girls are already making up songs about the brave valley girl who spoke truth to power. The Duchess's support changed everything. Over the next 3 days, Margaret noticed how nobles, who'd previously shunned them now, nodded respectfully when they passed. Whispers still followed them, but now they carried curiosity rather than just malice. The Duchess had been busy, using her vast network of connections to investigate the Baron's witnesses. One by one, she uncovered their debts, their secrets, the leverage the Baron held over them. She didn't threaten them, she didn't need to. She simply let them know she knew, and that was enough to make several suddenly remember urgent business in distant provinces that required them to leave court immediately. The final hearing arrived with all the weight of destiny pressing down on them. The throne room was packed beyond capacity, everyone eager to witness the conclusion of this drama that had entertained them all week. Margaret dressed carefully in a new gown the Duchess had sent deeper blue than her other, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. It was a gift, but also a message to the court. This woman stands under my protection. The children were similarly transformed in new clothes that made them look like they belonged. Though Margaret knew clothes couldn't change what they were common-born children who'd risen above their station through circumstances none of them had chosen. Sir Roderick stood beside them in his finest court attire, the midnight blue of his doublet making his eyes appear almost black. He'd been quiet all morning, but Margaret could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. This was it, their last chance. If the king ruled against them, they'd lose everything. Not just Ironhold, but their future together, because Margaret knew Sir Roderick would never dishonor another woman by taking a wife when legally bound elsewhere. The thought of Helena as Lady of Ironhold, of that vicious girl raising her children, made Margaret's stomach turn. The Baron presented his case with renewed vigor, though Margaret noticed several of his witnesses were conspicuously absent. He painted Sir Roderick as a man bewitched, possibly through dark arts, unable to see how he was being manipulated by a scheming woman. Lady Catherine testified tearfully about how her poor daughter had waited faithfully for 5 years, turning down other suitors, only to be cruelly rejected for a nobody. Helena herself took the stand, and her performance was magnificent, the perfect mixture of wounded innocence and noble suffering. If Margaret hadn't seen her real nature, she might have been convinced herself. Then it was their turn. Sir Roderick presented Charlotte's letters, not just to the Duchess but to others, all expressing her wish for him to find happiness after her death. The remaining witnesses who'd claimed he'd made promises at the funeral began to stammer and contradict themselves under questioning, their stories falling apart like wet parchment. It became increasingly clear they'd been paid or threatened, though none would admit it outright. The turning point came when the Duchess herself took the floor, her voice carrying the authority of decades at court despite her age. "Your Majesty," she began, her tone formal but with steel beneath it. "I've watched this farce long enough. The Baron seeks to steal through lies what he cannot earn through merit. Sir Roderick owes him nothing, the contract was clear, and no promise was made at dear Charlotte's funeral. I was there. We all were. The man could barely speak his wife's name, much less promise himself to another." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Moreover, I believe he's found exactly what his late wife hoped he would, a new chance at happiness." She gestured to Margaret and the children with one elegant hand. "This woman has brought life back to a man we all thought lost to grief. These children have filled halls that stood silent for too long. If that's not worthy of protection and respect, then this court has lost its way." The king leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. His gaze moved between Sir Roderick and Margaret, seeming to weigh them. "Sir Roderick," he said finally, "is this woman the reason you refused the Baron's daughter?" For a moment, Sir Roderick hesitated, and Margaret's heart stopped. Then he stepped forward, his voice clear and strong enough to reach every corner of the throne room. "No, Your Majesty. I refuse because the contract is void and Helena holds no appeal for me. But if you're asking if Margaret is important to me, then yes. She and her children have become essential to my life." The court gasped at the admission. Margaret felt her heart might burst from her chest at his public declaration. The Baron's face turned purple with rage, spittle flying as he shouted, "This is absurd. A noble lord cannot simply—" But the king raised his hand for silence. "Cannot what?" he interrupted, his voice deceptively mild. "Cannot choose his own path? Cannot honor his late wife's wishes? Cannot refuse a match based on greed and manipulation?" He stood, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. "I find in favor of Sir Roderick. The marriage contract is void. The Baron will cease all harassment immediately or face royal censure." The words rang through the hall like a bell, final and undeniable. The Baron sputtered, his face cycling through several shades of red and purple, but Lady Catherine grabbed his arm, recognizing defeat. Helena burst into tears. Real ones this time, Margaret thought, though they were tears of humiliation rather than heartbreak. As the court dispersed in a chaos of whispers and exclamations, Sir Roderick turned to Margaret. His eyes held a question she wasn't quite ready to answer, not here with everyone watching and listening. She saw him understand, saw him nod slightly. There would be time later, his expression seemed to say. They had won the right to that time. The journey home to Ironhold was completely different from the journey to court. Where tension had waited every mile before, now the children chattered excitedly about their adventure. Emma couldn't stop talking about the Duchess, who'd invited them to visit again and promised to send books for her studies. James boasted about punching the noble boy who'd insulted their mother, though Margaret had scolded him for it. Thomas just kept asking when they'd see the king again, convinced the monarch was his new friend because he'd smiled at Thomas during the proceedings. But between Margaret and Sir Roderick, there was a new tension of a different sort, an awareness that his public declaration had changed something fundamental between them. He'd called them essential. In front of the entire court, he'd essentially declared his intentions. The question now was what would come of it. They stopped at the same inns they'd used on the journey to court, but now the innkeepers treated them with marked respect. Word had already spread about the trial's outcome, and Margaret found herself being addressed as "my lady" more often than not, though she wasn't nobility. It felt strange and uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. On the last night before reaching home, they stopped at the inn where Sir Roderick had first gathered them months ago, when they'd been a desperate widow and a bitter knight. After the children were asleep, Margaret found herself unable to rest. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and ventured into the inn's small garden, where snow was beginning to fall softly. She wasn't surprised to find Sir Roderick there, standing among the bare winter roses. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart race. "You declared me essential," she said softly, not quite a question. "You are," he replied simply. "To the household? To the children?" She needed to know, needed to hear it clearly. "To me?" he clarified. "You're essential to me, Margaret. Not as my household manager. Not as the woman who cares for Ironhold. As yourself. Just you. Margaret's breath caught. What does that mean exactly? He turned to face her fully, and she could see him gathering courage like a warrior preparing for battle. It means I've been a fool. It means I've spent months fighting feelings I should have embraced. It means Charlotte was right. I've been wasting my life mourning instead of living. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the snowflakes catching in his dark hair. And now? She prompted, her voice barely a whisper. Now I want to live. With you. With the children. If you'll have me. Roderick, she began, but he rushed on. I love you. The words burst from him like water breaking through a dam. Not the way I loved Charlotte. That was young love, untested and innocent. This is different. Stronger, born from understanding and shared strength. You've seen me at my worst, bitter, cruel, lost in grief, and still you stand beside me. You challenge me, support me, make me want to be better than I am. His hands came up to frame her face. I love how you fight for your children, how you stand up to nobles who think they're your betters, how you've made Ironhold a home again. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you look at me like I'm not broken beyond repair. Margaret felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. But, he tensed, preparing for rejection. But what? She smiled through her tears. But nothing. I was going to say, but people will talk. But then I realized, I don't care. Let them say I'm a fortune hunter, that I seduced you, that I'm reaching above my station. They'll say it anyway. She covered his hands with hers. The truth is, I love you. The broken parts and the healing parts, and even the parts that might never fully heal. I love how gentle you are with my children, how you've given them a father when I thought they'd never have one again. The children, he started, already call Ironhold home, and Thomas asked me yesterday if he could call you Papa. Sir Roderick's voice broke slightly. What did you tell him? Margaret laughed softly. I told him he should ask you himself. She paused, then added, he also asked if you were going to marry me and give him more brothers and sisters. Sir Roderick made a sound between a laugh and a sob. That boy sees too much. Then, more seriously, marry me, Margaret. Not because we need protection from the Baron, not for convenience or propriety. Marry me because I can't imagine a future without you in it. People will say, she began, but he cut her off with a kiss. It was nothing like she'd imagined a first kiss might be, not gentle or tentative, but fierce, with months of denied longing, desperate and demanding, and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Let them say what they want, he said roughly. We know the truth. Margaret pulled him down for another kiss, pouring all her answer into it. When they separated again, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, she said. Yes, to all of it. To marriage, to the future, to everything. They were married in Ironhold's chapel on the first day of spring, when the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the earth. The Duchess came from court, bringing half the nobility with her out of sheer curiosity. The Baron and his family were pointedly not invited, though Margaret heard they'd left for their southern estates immediately after the trial, unable to bear the humiliation. Margaret wore Charlotte's wedding dress, which Sir Roderick had kept preserved in lavender. He'd offered it to her with tears in his eyes, saying Charlotte would have wanted it, would have been happy to see it worn again in joy, rather than packed away in sorrow. The dress had been altered to fit Margaret's slightly taller frame, and she'd added touches of her own, her mother's pearl necklace, a belt Emma had embroidered with silver thread. The children served as attendants, dressed in their finest clothes. Thomas carried the rings on a silk cushion, his face so serious and concentrated that several guests had to hide their smiles. Emma held Margaret's train, while James stood beside Sir Roderick as his young groomsman. The chapel was transformed with spring flowers, not the elaborate arrangements favored by nobility, but simple wildflowers that reminded Margaret of the meadows where she'd played as a child. The light streaming through the stained glass windows painted everything in jeweled tones, and Margaret thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful than Sir Roderick waiting for her at the altar, his face open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen it in public before. As Sir Roderick placed the ring on Margaret's finger, He spoke the traditional vows, his voice strong and clear. But then he added his own words, speaking directly to her as if they were alone. "You brought me back from the dead," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me reason to hope again when I thought I'd forgotten how. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for whatever time we're granted. I promise to be a father to your children and to any children we might have together. I promise to never again let grief make me forget that life is meant to be lived." Margaret responded through tears she didn't try to hide. "You gave us sanctuary when the world turned away. You showed my children that kindness exists even in dark places. You proved that strength doesn't mean cruelty, and that power can be used to protect rather than harm. I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you when you need it, to comfort you when darkness threatens. I promise to love you without reservation, without fear, without limits. I promise to help you remember joy, every single day." When they kissed, the chapel erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the ancient stones. Emma, James, and Thomas rushed to embrace them both, and Sir Roderick lifted Thomas onto his shoulders while pulling the other two close. The boys' delighted laughter echoed off the stone walls like bell song. The Duchess wiped away tears, muttering loudly about how she was far too old for such sentiment, while clearly loving every moment. Even William was crying openly, not bothering to hide his joy at seeing his master happy again. The feast that followed was legendary even by noble standards. The great hall of Ironhold had been transformed with candles and flowers and silk banners. Musicians played in the gallery while servants circulated with wine and delicacies. For the first time in 5 years, the castle rang with joy and music and laughter. Sir Roderick danced with Margaret, holding her like she was made of spun glass and might disappear if he let go. Then he danced with Emma, who stood on his feet for the complicated steps, and even let little Thomas attempt something that looked more like enthusiastic jumping than dancing. The servants, who'd grown to love Margaret over the months, celebrated like it was their own family's happiness. Bertha had outdone herself with the feast, creating dishes that would be talked about for years. Even the mountain villagers had come, bringing gifts of wool and carved wood and preserved foods, welcoming their lord's new lady with genuine warmth. William pulled Margaret aside during the festivities, while Sir Roderick was teaching James a particularly silly dance that had everyone laughing. "My lady, or should I say, my proper lady, now you've done something miraculous," the old steward said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've brought him back to life. You've made this castle a home again." Margaret squeezed his weathered hands. "We all did it together, William. Every servant who stayed loyal, every person who believed things could be better. We all saved each other." William shook his head. "No, my lady. You were the catalyst. Charlotte would be so pleased. I think she might have sent you to us." As the night grew late, and the guests began retiring to their chambers or heading home, Sir Roderick and Margaret stood on the battlements, looking out over their domain. The children had finally collapsed from excitement and been carried to bed by servants who cooed over them like they were precious treasures. For the first time since they'd met, Margaret and Sir Roderick were alone as husband and wife. The valley stretched out below them, touched by moonlight that turned everything to silver. In the distance, wolves howled, but the sound didn't seem threatening, more like a celebration, nature itself acknowledging the joy of the night. "Are you happy?" Roderick asked, pulling her close against him. She could feel his heart beating against her back, strong and steady. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered honestly. "When I was standing in that cottage, starving and desperate, I never could have imagined this. Not just the castle or the comfort, but the love, the family, the future." She turned in his arms to face him. "Are you happy?" He considered the question seriously. "I didn't think I could be happy again. I thought happiness was something I'd used up, something that died with Charlotte. But this," he gestured to the castle, to her, to everything around them, "this is different, not better or worse than before, just different. And yes, I'm happy, truly, deeply happy. Even though you're now married to the widow of a cursed castle," she teased gently. Roderick laughed, a sound that was becoming more common but still felt like a gift each time she heard it. "It doesn't feel very cursed anymore," he said. "If anything, it feels blessed." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then her lips, each touch reverent. You broke the curse, Margaret. You and the children. You filled this place with love again, and in doing so, you saved me. As if summoned by their discussion of them, 3 small figures appeared in the doorway to the battlements. Emma, James, and Thomas stood there in their nightclothes, looking sheepish but hopeful. We couldn't sleep, Emma explained, though Margaret suspected they'd never really tried. Too excited, James added, bouncing on his toes. Thomas just held up his arms to Roderick, who lifted him without hesitation, settling the boy on his hip like he'd been doing it all the child's life. Can we watch the stars? Thomas asked. As a family? The last word was said with such emphasis, such joy, that Margaret felt tears threaten again. Of course, Margaret and Roderick said in unison, then looked at each other and smiled. They settled on the battlements, wrapping blankets around themselves against the cool spring night. Thomas curled in Roderick's lap, already calling him Papa as naturally as breathing. James leaned against Margaret's side while Emma pointed out constellations Master Benedict had taught her about before his death. Tell us a story, Papa, Thomas demanded sleepily, snuggling deeper into Roderick's embrace. Roderick looked momentarily stunned at the easy use of the title he always did, as if he couldn't quite believe he'd earned it. Then he began, his deep voice carrying across the quiet night. Once upon a time, there was a knight who thought his heart had turned to stone. But then a brave lady and her 3 children came and made it warm again, Emma supplied, having heard versions of this story before. Exactly right, Roderick agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The knight had been very sad for a very long time. He lived in a big, dark castle all alone except for some loyal servants who worried about him constantly. Why was he sad? Thomas asked, though he knew the answer. Because he'd lost people he loved very much. And he thought that meant he could never love anyone again. He thought his heart was too broken to ever work properly. But hearts can heal, James said wisely. Mama says scars make us stronger, not weaker. Margaret kissed the top of her son's head, proud of his understanding. That's right, sweetheart. Roderick continued the story, weaving truth and fairy tale together. In his version, the brave lady was a warrior princess in disguise. Her children were magical beings who could see through illusions, and the castle was under an enchantment that could only be broken by true love and genuine laughter. As his voice grew softer and Thomas's eyes grew heavier, the story became more fanciful. Dragons made of sadness that had to be defeated with joy, a magic garden that only bloomed when children played in it, a treasure that turned out to be not gold, but the love of family. By the time he finished, all 3 children were asleep. Thomas was drooling slightly on Roderick's shoulder, James was slumped against Margaret's side, and Emma had curled up between them like a cat. The adults sat quietly for a moment, neither wanting to break the spell of peace that had settled over them. We should get them to bed, Margaret finally whispered. In a moment, Roderick replied, his voice equally soft. I want to remember this, all of it. The weight of Thomas in my arms, the sound of their breathing, the way the moonlight makes your hair look like spun silver. I spent so long believing I'd never have this, a family, a future, hope. I want to memorize every second. Margaret reached over Emma to take his hand. We have a lifetime of moments like this ahead of us. God willing, he agreed, then carefully stood, still holding Thomas. Come, let's get these little warriors to their beds. They carried the children to their rooms, which were no longer in the servants' quarters but in the family wing, close to the master suite. Each child had been given their own chamber, decorated according to their interests, books for Emma, toy soldiers for James, and colorful tapestries of knights and dragons for Thomas. As they tucked each child in, Margaret marveled at how natural this felt, the 4 of them moving together like they'd been a family for years rather than months. When they finally reached their own chambers, Charlotte's rooms had been gently packed away, and new quarters prepared that held no ghosts. Roderick pulled Margaret close. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For seeing past the monster everyone said I was. For being brave enough to take a chance on a bitter, broken night. For giving me back my life. Margaret reached up to cup his face. You were never a monster, just a man in pain, and you gave us back our lives too. We saved each other. A good bargain then, he murmured, before kissing her with all the passion and promise of their new beginning. As dawn painted the mountains gold, Margaret woke to find Roderick watching her, his expression soft with wonder. "What is it?" she asked sleepily. "I used to dread mornings," he admitted. "They meant another day to endure. Now I look forward to them, to seeing what you and the children will do, what chaos Thomas will create, what brilliant thing Emma will say, what new skill James will master. To watching you manage the household with a grace that still amazes me. To all of it." Margaret smiled, pulling him down for a kiss. "I love you, my unlikely knight. And I love you, my unexpected salvation." They lay there as the castle began to wake around them, servants starting their daily tasks, roosters crowing in the courtyard, the sound of James already practicing with his wooden sword against a training dummy. It was the sound of life, of home, of future. A knock at the door interrupted their peace. "Papa, Mama, Thomas is trying to climb the chandelier again." Roderick groaned while Margaret laughed. "The chaos begins early today," he muttered, but he was smiling as he said it. They rose and dressed quickly, hurrying to prevent whatever disaster Thomas was courting. They found him hanging from the great hall's chandelier while Emma stood below, hands on her hips, scolding him like a miniature mother. James was offering helpful suggestions about how to climb higher. "Thomas Edmund," Margaret called, using his full name. "Get down this instant." "But Mama, I wanted to see if I could fly like the knight in Papa's story." Roderick strode over, reaching up to pluck the boy from his perch. "Knights don't fly, little warrior. They keep their feet on the ground and their heads out of trouble." "That's not what William says," Thomas protested. "He says you used to climb everything when you were little. He says you once got stuck on the roof and cried until your papa got you down." Margaret tried to hide her laugh as Roderick's ears turned red. "William talks too much," he muttered. "I want to hear that story," James demanded. "Me too," Emma chimed in. And so their life continued, each day bringing new adventures, new challenges, new joys. The Baron made a few more attempts to cause trouble, but the Duchess's protection and the King's decree proved too powerful to overcome. Eventually, he retreated entirely, selling his holdings in the valley and moving to the far south where his defeat wouldn't follow him. Ironhold thrived under Margaret's management and Roderick's renewed leadership. The castle became known as a place of justice and opportunity, where hard work was rewarded regardless of birth. The mountain villagers prospered from increased trade, and the great hall often rang with music and laughter as feast days were actually celebrated again. A year after their wedding, Margaret gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, who seemed determined to be even more adventurous than Thomas. Roderick wept openly when he held them for the first time, unashamed of his tears. "Charlotte would be so happy," he said softly. "She always wanted the castle full of children." "She would," Margaret agreed, understanding that his love for Charlotte would always be part of him, and that was as it should be. "And she would love how you've honored her memory not by dying with her, but by living fully." The children grew strong and clever. Emma became known throughout the kingdom as a scholar, eventually becoming the royal historian. James joined the King's Guard, his sense of justice and protectiveness making him a natural defender of the innocent. Thomas, to no one's surprise, became an explorer, mapping unknown lands but always returning home to regale them with impossible tales that might have been true. The twins carried on the tradition of chaos and joy in equal measure. And through it all, Margaret and Roderick loved each other with the fierce, steady love of two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk together toward the light. They'd learned that love wasn't just the passionate romance of stories, but also holding each other through nightmares, raising children together, facing challenges as one, and choosing each other again and again, day after day. Years later, when their hair was gray and their children had children of their own, they still walked the battlements together each evening. One night, as they watched their grandchildren play in the courtyard below, Roderick said quietly, "Do you remember that night you came to my door, desperate and afraid? How could I forget? I thought you might turn us away, or worse. And I thought I was doing you a simple kindness, nothing more. I never imagined that a hungry widow and 3 children would change everything. That you'd save me," he corrected. "That you'd teach me that closing yourself off from love doesn't honor the dead, it just creates more death." That choosing happiness isn't a betrayal, but a tribute to those who can't choose anymore. Margaret leaned into him, still fitting perfectly against his side after all these years. We saved each other. That's what love does. It transforms us, heals us, makes us more than we could ever be alone. Below them, their grandchildren's laughter rose like music, filling the air with joy. Ironhold stood strong around them, no longer a monument to grief, but a testament to resilience, to the power of love to transform even the darkest places into homes filled with light. The hungry widow had once said, "Take my children," out of desperation, offering the only thing she had left. The knight had answered, "I'll take you too." And in that moment, without knowing it, they'd begun to save each other. And if sometimes, late at night, Margaret thought she felt a gentle presence watching them, a whisper of approval, a touch of gratitude from a woman who'd loved this man first and trusted the universe to send someone to love him after, well, she kept that feeling to herself. Some gifts were too precious for words, and the blessing of Charlotte's peace was one of them. Love, Margaret had learned, was infinite. It didn't diminish when shared, but multiplied, filling every corner of their lives with warmth and light. Their story became legend in the valley, and beyond the tale of the hungry widow and the grieving knight who'd found each other in the depths of winter and created their own spring. It was told at firesides and in great halls, growing with each telling. But the truth, Margaret knew, was both simpler and more profound than any story. Two broken people had chosen to heal together. Two incomplete families had become one whole. And in choosing love over fear, hope over despair, they'd proved that even the darkest curse could be broken by the simple, extraordinary act of opening one's heart again. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Margaret and Roderick stood together, surrounded by the life they'd built, the love they'd nurtured, the family they'd created. And in that moment, they were complete, not perfect, never that, but whole and happy and home.